Welcome to a very special edition of Ask GCN Anything, as we're very lucky to have with us on this week's show none other than former Olympic medalist, former world time trial champion and current duathlon long distance champion, Emma Pooley. Welcome, Emma, to the show, and thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Well, first off, just to set the scene just a little bit, just for me first, I'm going to ask a question. What we've done, we've thrown it out on social media to viewers of GCN to ask lots of questions. We have over 20 questions for you. But one of the most fascinating things for me about your career, better known, of course, as a remarkably successful road cyclist. Then you moved on to duathlon, then triathlon. But fascinating thing for me, what about that transition? How did you find moving over from one discipline to the next?
Well, I actually did triathlon before I got into cycling, so I didn't publicise it much when I was a cyclist,
Okay.
for obvious reasons. But I did sort of Olympic distance triathlon then. I actually was a runner as a kid, so I had I wasn't a very good runner, but I had a background in running training, and so the running side was kind of easy because I'd always run in the off season when it's cold and when I had to work. And in fact, I love running, so I'd always want to run straight after World Championships every year. So I thought it would be fairly straightforward. It turned out I was a bit rubbish at swimming, and I still am, despite trying my best. With some good coaching help, I didn't get much better. So in the end, I found with triathlon I had to pick my races where the swim was less important. So transition was fun and only moderately successful, I would say.
Okay, so what was the catalyst for that transition in the first place? Was it kind of looking back at, maybe, was it the road scene not quite to your liking, or was it what
I just wanted different challenges, I think. Like, I really enjoyed my time cycling most of the time, and I had a great time. I met some wonderful people, and like I have lots of, I don't regret doing it at all. But I think I felt the pull of these sort of iconic triathlon races like Alpe d'Huez and Norseman I still want to do, and there's one called Embrun in France, and there are all these sort of crazy races where get to race in the mountains, which I kind of missed a bit in women's cycling.
You are
sometimes.
well good at, aren't you?
Well, I don't know, maybe just no one else tries it.
Put
No.
half an hour into me in the King of Mountains Challenge, by the way.
Yeah, I trained very specifically for that. Yeah. So I wanted. It was more that I felt the pull of these iconic races that involved mountains generally. So yeah.
Okay. Well, we've got quite a few questions from you, as I've said, so we'll crack on. The first question comes from Victor Lundqvist231 over on Instagram, who asks, Emma, what is your favourite race to watch and also to ride?
To watch would probably be Flèche Wallonne, but it's not my favourite to ride because having raced it is incredibly stressful, and so I enjoy watching it because I know how you know, it's great watching someone race it well because you know where you should be in the bunch, but as a rider it was incredibly stressful. As a rider myself, and I think there's a race in Switzerland called the Cura Rosa, which is just all uphill. So as a road race, that was very straightforward, just full gas. And the Taiwan KOM similarly, in that it's I was never very good at riding in the bunch, so I found it a bit stressful. So anything that goes uphill straight away is kind of less stressful. So.
Because you can pretty much dictate what happens when it's going uphill. Although Flèche Wallonne is the men's and the women's race remarkably stressful, all about the Mur de Huy, and of course you're a multiple winner of that event as well, aren't you?
Only once, sadly.
What was it? I thought it was a couple of you won it once.
I wish. No, I multiple DNFs actually.
Okay.
That was the most unlucky race for me. I had, I think, a couple of times in ambulance, and it is a very stressful race, and it's all about where you are, and everyone thinks about the Mur de Huy, but it's about what you do earlier in the race, obviously, like, you know, how tired you are when you get there, and if you're even still there. And a couple of times I didn't make it. It was very stressful. So.
There's been a couple of questions before we move on. You're very diminutive in stature, and one of the interesting things for me, a stressful race like the Flèche Wallonne, how did you find imposing yourself in the peloton when it gets extremely stressful? Because that must have been, it's a genuine issue for, if you're not one of the bigger, stronger riders, although you've clearly got that craft there. It's like, how did you kind of impose yourself?
I didn't really. That's kind of the problem. So so the year I won Flèche Wallonne is because I had a fantastic team. I mean, I was in good shape, but it was more that I had a fantastic team around me. And in road racing, you can save a lot of energy by being protected in the peloton. Okay. So that year we had a really strong team, and I was the protected rider, so I was looked after. And it's much easier to stay in the right place in the bunch when you've got a presence of teammates around you. Other times, if I wasn't, if I was a workhorse, it was fine because I could sit on the front or do something useful. But I've always, because I started cycling relatively late, I did struggle with the peloton skills, and also I can't see anything if I'm not on the side or at the front. All I can see is just a sea of people, and I can't see what's coming up in the road. So There
we go. Well, next up, this is a question again on Instagram from Katiath Apologies if I've pronounced that wrong. I do that quite often, so please bear with me. Hi Emma, I'm 22 and I've just started in cycling. Do you think it's too late? What advice can you give to people who are starting in their 20s? That's not that young, is it? Or how old is it really?
It's not that old. That's the age I was when I started road racing.
There we
So
go.
I think that's a perfectly reasonable age to start cycling. I think it's never too late for a start. I mean, that isn't late, but even if you were 52, it's not too late. It's a great sport to take up. I think what I really enjoyed about getting into cycling was the community. So I learnt most by riding with the club when I was a student, and the student club and the town club in Cambridge, and people were incredibly helpful. And I would say the world of bikes can be quite confusing and stressful and expensive when you're not used to it, and you could spend many hours reading all the stuff or watching GCN videos, which helps, but I think that the best thing you can do is get advice off friends, because so ride with the club and get to know people, and that way you also get to know great routes. I'm not sort of looking at a phone the whole time. So other people is my advice for getting into cycling. And they'll give you advice and give you their spare old wheels and their spare kit and stuff. So
I think that's I think I can speak for Dan and for Simon and for Tom as well, myself. That's how we got all into cycling through the clubs. Yeah. And that's one of the best ways to learn is find a group of people that you trust and go out riding, and you'll learn very quickly that way.
Yeah, to be honest, I hated cycling when I started because I got cold and I was only doing it as cross training, and I only carried on because people were friendly and nice, and we stopped for coffee at a garden centre every weekend.
Cracking social scene. Cycling's got a cracking social scene. We can talk about coffee and cakes all day. So next up, we have this question over on Instagram again from Mike_Vesta10. Who were your idols growing up, and when did you start competitively racing?
So when I was growing up, I was a runner. So my idols were Paul and Kelly Holmes. I remember watching the London Marathon as a kid, and she ran every mile of the London Marathon quicker than I could run even the 1500 on the track, and it was just incredible to me. And I think those two runners, their personalities of sort of humility came across really well, even though they were great champions. So I raced from when I was about actually my first sport was rowing, so I started rowing racing when I was 13, but it turned out that I wasn't quite the right size. So then I did some cross country running when I was from about 15 onwards, and then didn't get into bike racing till I was 22. Yeah, I never even had an under 23 season because I was already
There we go. When you did the Olympic Games, did you get to meet your heroes? Did you
Yes,
get to speak to Kelly and Sue Paula?
Yeah, so I was on the same flight back from Beijing as Paul Radcliffe, and I mustered up the courage to get her autograph, and it's still in pride of place at home, and I'm sure she was fed up, but she was very gracious about it, and it was wonderful to meet her. And I met Kelly Holmes in one of the sort of post-Olympic bash things. Events, yeah.
And of course, that was the year you got the silver medal, wasn't it? On that really tough course in Beijing.
Yeah, it was a good course.
Good course, designed for you. Well, next up we have this question from Lang, Lang_Augustine. Over on Instagram, what is the best way to get into competitive cycling? I'm transitioning from rowing into cycling, and I'm not sure how to step into the competition scene.
Well, it depends what kind of cycling you want to do, I think. I think that in the UK, well, probably in most countries in the world, there's sort of graded races. So you can probably get a day license for sort of some races, or I think I started out on sort of a bronze level British cycling license, and and again, I think that going riding with a club is a really useful way to meet people who race a bit. Choose your club, obviously, and share a lift to a race, and people will give you a bit of advice. But first, I think try some local time trials. So time trialing is the easiest logistically.
That's how I got into it as well. That's my first competitive thing.
Almost every town has local time trials in the evening after work, and there's very logistically easy. You just rock up and pay your 10 quid, and there's often cake, afterwards. So
what's not to like?
Yeah.
What's not to like? And generally the cake and the tea and the coffee is free if you give your number in as well. So you've prepaid for your brews. Well, that's what it was like in the 80s.
Wow.
Maybe. Well, I haven't ridden a time trial since 1995.
It's not free anymore. I think it's at least 50p.
Oh no, sorry about that misinformation there. Moving swiftly on to this question from Woolly Alien. Some cracking names on social media. Woolly Alien 2017. How do you feel about the restructuring of the women's road calendar?
The UCI calendar.
The World Tour.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think they've been talking about this for a while about having 2 tiers of racing, and I think it is important, and the people who are trying to make changes at the UCI are doing a good job in that they're trying to move it in the direction of having 2 tiers of teams and 2 tiers of races, because that is important, because at the moment previously there's been just the category of UCI team has covered a very large swathe of budgets and abilities and standards, and it's sort of been a bit unfair on the lower teams, and I think you've got to see racing as it's entertainment, but also for the people that race, it's just a bit harsh on some of the starter teams that are trying to help people progress if they never have a chance. So I think it's excellent, and I hope it works out well. I
know there's been a few tweaks this season to the Women's World Tour calendar, because just to explain that, there's only one tier. There's World Tour racing, but if you're a UCI women's team, you can ride in those events. But I think it's the top 15 teams or top 20 teams now that actually get into the events. But everybody essentially is classed as the same. Yeah. But the sport is heading in the right direction. But I do agree, a two-tiered structure would be a definite boon.
I think more gradation basically, because otherwise it's like going. Some people have the physical talent to go from amateur to top level World Cup, World Tour straight away, but for some people it's like going from 11 primary school to A levels, and it's not that people don't have the talent, it's just that you need time to build the skills and the experience, and if racing is going to be entertaining, which it should be, then it needs to be competitive. So I think that structuring is really good.
Great stuff. Well, next up we have this question from Nick Humby over on Twitter this time. Staying with women's cycling, how should we encourage more women into racing at grassroots level? Good question.
Well, I think that just getting more women into cycling at grassroots level, just being welcoming and making it more accessible. And I think whether people want to race or not, I'm wary of pushing people into racing. So I enjoy racing, and I know lots of women do, but I don't think that it's an inevitable path for everyone. And some people are never going to want to race, guys and girls.
Most people won't race. And I know British cycling membership, there's a very small amount of people that race.
Exactly. And cycling is first of all a mode of transport, and then entertainment and fun and a leisure activity. And the racing scene it was important to me, and I care about it, but not everyone wants to race. So I don't think one should assume that just because a woman takes up cycling and is even super strong that she's necessarily going to want to race. But if I think I think British cycling's moving in the right direction. But I think personally if there were more races in the UK, and I know the women's racing scene has come on a lot, so there are far more races now than when I started. But if there were more sort of starter level races and a sort of again a graded system to move upwards, then I think that would help people. Because it is tricky if you want to do a race but you have to drive for 2 hours to get there, or it's a quite high level race, so it's a bit intimidating. Then but I think certainly the time trialling scene is very accessible to women as well. So.
I think just on that point, encouraging more women to racing, and it's like the first step is to encourage them to ride a bike, isn't it? And I was reading an article about a year ago now. One of the biggest blockers to women riding bikes is safety on the roads. There's a perception that the roads are unsafe, and it's the same with young people as well, with kids getting into cycling. So I think it's a bigger story, isn't it? It's like slowly changing infrastructure to make people in general, including women, feel safe on the roads, get them on their bikes, and then having a broader race offering to get them racing if they want to do so.
The thing I care about most is that people ride their bikes and enjoy it and get more cars off the roads and have fun and get fit. So
good stuff.
I mean the other thing with women racing is I think that the more women's racing that's seen on TV or on YouTube, or the more that is inspirational to people. And I know quite a lot of people who've wanted to try a race because they've watched the Olympics or something, and certainly a lot of people got in touch with me after London saying, oh, that was amazing to watch, not me but the race, and I'm going to try my local crit, and I think that's great. So I think the more coverage there is out there of women's racing, the better.
Next up, we've got this question from Kevin Cole 10, who asks, what's been the piece of equipment that you thought wasn't going to help you but ended up being a game changer?
I don't know about game changer, but the thing I was really sceptical about was Di2 and electric shifting, and when it came out I thought, oh, rubbish, whenever it rains it's going to short circuit and there's no way that's going to work, and rubbish. And then for a few seasons I was on mechanical Shimano and kept getting dropped by people who could effortlessly shift into the big ring on a climb, and it was getting quite annoying. And last season my sponsor arranged that I had Di2 on my race bike, and it was fantastic. So
you're quite a late adopter to electric shifting. Yeah.
So I did use it on just for a couple of years on my bike at World Championships for time trial only, because sometimes it's very the thing with Di2, you can have the shifters in two places. So, but never on the road bike, because basically I was on teams that couldn't quite afford it. So oh my goodness, it's fantastic. It really so I get a bit lazy, like going back to mechanical. It's like, oh, put some effort into shifting.
Yeah, you have to put torque through your fingers and stuff. You don't want to be doing things like that, wasting energy.
No, waste of energy, exactly. Yeah, so that's the thing that really surprised me, and I have to admit that I was wrong.
I think same for me. I think I was a little bit sort of sceptical of it, but I just wouldn't go back now. I wouldn't go back. Lucky enough to have it on most of my bikes, but it is. I think it is one of the biggest game changers. Next up is this from Matt Gavino. What was the total weight of your bike, your Bond bike that you used in the KOM Challenge?
7.4 kilos.
7.4 kilos. That's pretty light, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ours was 6.8.
Yeah.
Do you know what? Anyway, moving on. Let's not dwell on that.
I think it would have been easier for me to lose. It would have been cheaper for me to lose 600 grams off myself than off the bike. So I should have done that.
We have a question here from Fab_star_ha. Will you be racing Ironman in 2018?
No. I'm going to do some triathlons. I want to do Norseman, but not Ironman. No.
Okay, Norseman. That's a pretty brutal triathlon, isn't it?
So it's the same distances as an Ironman event, but it's in Norway in the fjords, and you jump into a boat off a boat into a fjord in the freezing cold in the dark. I like mountain, and then the run and the ride are both mountainous. But I like the mountains, but I don't like the cold, so I'm gonna have to do some kind of cold weather training, I think.
Well, our resident triathlete Mark Threlfall, I think it was suggested he was going to do it, but he's somehow sort of sloped his shoulders, isn't he? He's not going to be doing that one. But I mean, you're
Is it
talking
because
about.
you heard I was going?
I think it might be. To be honest, probably heard it on the grapevine somewhere. But just looking back through your career, that's the latter part of your career. Just a question from me now. The type of events that you've entered, they really are. Extreme challenges. Is that something that you've found? You've clearly been maybe cherry picking the events that kind of suit your kind of physiological and mental attributes, but something like the Norseman, that's brutal. Is that something that you kind of?
Yeah, totally. Because I mean, like physiologically, I like climbing. I like it mentally, but also I think I'm just better at hilly races than I am at flat races. Like I've tried some flat Ironman events and I was rubbish. And they're not bad at cycling. These other athletes, they're very, very good. They're strong all-round athletes, and I don't have much of a physiological advantage when it's flat and long, and I also got a bit bored. Whereas with mountains to take off, I love riding up, racing in the mountains. I love the scenery and it. Actually enjoy the racing. So yeah, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to do triathlon, was to be able to race up, Alpe d'Huez, whereas I never got to ride that as a cyclist competitively, really. So. Fantastic.
Well, a very simple question here. What is your favourite pre-ride meal? And that comes from Sergio Anstram.
So I am quite into sort of breakfast at any time of day. All
day breakfast.
Yeah. So porridge is the thing. Like I think oats are cheap and they're nutritious and they're a good blend of carbohydrates. So if I was about to do a time trial, I probably wouldn't have porridge because it's a bit heavy. But no, I generally have porridge pre-ride, pre-training, and make these porridge cakes, which are pretty tasty.
Porridge cakes, they sound amazing.
They're better than they sound, actually.
Can you share the kind of recipe on
No,
this now?
No, I'm writing a recipe book, so you'll have to buy the book. I'll bring you a cake, but you can't have the recipe.
Random book plug midway through RTC. I love it when that sort of stuff happens. Great stuff. Okay, this next up is over on Facebook from Nicola Grant. Back in early 2012, Emma was training in Australia and told me her post-cycle recovery was chocolate milk and nuts. Have you changed your nutrition since then, or do you still swear by it? Smiley face. Do you remember that person?
No, sorry.
sorry, Nicola, if you're watching.
I am a strong advocate of chocolate milk as post-ride recovery, or iced coffee, anything with milk and a bit of sugar, basically. I don't remember the nuts. I do really like snacking on nuts, but I wouldn't generally eat them straight after riding. They're fats that generally take longer to digest, so straight after training or towards the end of training you want to have simple sugars that will refuel your muscle cells straight away. So in fact I try and keep off the nuts because I can eat, they're so delicious, and I just calories.
What's your favourite nut? Mine's pistachio, for the record. What's
walnut.
your favourite walnut pistachios? Yeah. Leave your favourite nuts in the comment section down below.
Squirrels included.
Okay, next up is this from Paul Wright over on Facebook. What is your split between running and riding when training for duathlons? And is the running HIIT, so high intensity interval training, or longer endurance type runs?
For me, I try and run as much as I can without getting injured, which was always my limiting factor, I'm afraid. Yeah. So I try and run ideally 5 times a week, and I'll try and do one long run a week and a couple of interval sessions, so one flat and one hill interval session, which is I find hill intervals really useful because a lot of the races I do are hilly, and also it's much less damaging on your legs, so you can get a really good cardiovascular workout without so much muscular damage. And then a couple of easier runs or brick runs or drill sessions, and I find those really useful. So 5 runs a week optimally, but if I'm worried about injury then I'll cut that down to 3. But the important thing for me is regular running, because if I leave running for a month or so, you feel terrible when you go back to it. So and then riding, that depends on the time of year and what event I'm training for. But yeah, and it also depends how much time I've got, because riding is quite time consuming. I got quite into my Zwift last autumn training for the KOM, and it was really good in that it was super time efficient and hard, a bit like a run. You could get a really good workout in an hour, so I'm a big fan of that.
Good stuff. In terms of the running, do you just do road running, or do you mix it up? Do you run sand when you can, or do you do cross country? Because I was coming from a running background. Like I used to, if I had a bit of a niggle, I kind of run on fields a little bit, so it took the shock a little bit.
Yeah, I love running off road. It's more fun, and again I do a bit of trail running racing wise, and so it's important to remember that sort of technical foot agility thing, which if you don't practice it, you get lazy ankles. So I try and run off road if I can. It's a bit softer, but sometimes if it's dark or super muddy or there's not much time, then road is the only way.
Good stuff. Well, next up is this question from Ellis Pullinger. Do you change your training each year, or have you found something that works for you and you just stick to what you know best? Or, I mean, because I was adapting my training all the way through my career, basically. I'd never really had any coach, but I kind of just cherry-picked and was adapting to. Or are you kind of a bit of a traditionalist? Or?
Oh, no, my training's changed hugely. So I think when especially because the events I train for have changed a lot over the years. And when I started cycling, I was totally clueless, and I had a fantastic coach, and he didn't really so much set training as sort of guided the overall training plot. And I just found that when I started cycling, the more I did, the better I got, because I didn't have that background in cycling. And then it got to a point in my career where I realised that doing more was really not helping, and that I was just getting tired. So I had to stop planning my training. And now with triathlon and stuff, it's very event dependent, like how I train. So I do obviously think about it. And so for the Taiwan KOM, I didn't run for about a month before because I didn't want to wreck the race. Have
you got any tips for me and Si about the KOM challenge? What did we do wrong? We just weren't fit enough, were we?
I think no. I think that because I'd done it the year before, so I had a lot of experience, and like it's an event where it really helps to know, like, you know, the lie of the land and where to be in the bunch, and, you know, I'll give you some tips.
Thanks. So when we finish this, I will sit down with my notepad and get some more tips. Definitely needed some. Bit of an odd question here, a curveball type question from Drayton Knowles over on Twitter. Do you know that Dan Lloyd actually rode for the Sabelo test team?
Did he?
So he says.
Yeah.
Obviously, like I know.
Not the original Sabelo test team. He wasn't on the women's team.
No,
that was the original team.
Not that, as far as we know.
Well, no. He would have stood out. I mean, we had some tall girls, but he's pretty tall. He would have stood out.
So I think there was an awareness of Lloyd's presence.
It was a good team, and it was a great team because the men's and women's team, we had a lot to do with each other, and we had training camps together. It was awesome. Yeah.
What was it like? Was he as strange as he was in real life?
Yeah, but in a good way.
In a good way. Yeah. Okay, we love Lloyd, really. Next up is this question from Neil Ablard, who asks, does Emma think we're heading towards parity for women's events, back to women's cycling again, anytime soon? Sponsors seem to be slowly coming on board, but not quickly enough. Why not? What do you think? Given the close and exciting racing that the girls give us, with as many marketable personalities as the men have. So we talked about the sport heading in the right direction. Do you think the pace of change is quick enough?
I don't, as an ex-pro cyclist, I'd like to see it a bit quicker. I think I got a bit frustrated with the slowness of it, but it is moving in the right direction. And the thing that I have to remind myself of is that cycling is a sport with a huge amount of history, and you can't just change things overnight, and that's a good thing, because that history is a richness in the sport that we all appreciate, and it is moving in the right direction. I think the more fans like you that want to watch women's cycling, then I think the more you call out for better coverage of women's races, because there is some fantastic racing out there that it doesn't get covered at all. And it's all very well reading tweets or race reports, but the thing that really hooks people is watching footage. And so I think the more fans that say we want to watch it, then race organisers will be able to invest in the coverage, and then sponsors will see the advantage. But the prize money, obviously it would be nice, but that's the last concern. Like, the important thing is to have the races available and have people able to watch them.
And then build it from there, basically. Exactly, so you get the commercial.
And the most important thing is that the races are available. And so I think it's important to be super grateful to the race organisers who do an amazing job. And a lot of them, it's not even their main job to put on women's races, and they do a really good job of it. So.
Next up is this question from Gabrielle Rivest. I'd be really curious to see what Emma thinks about the use of one-by drivetrains for road bikes. One of the possible races that she sees it being used in is the Taiwan KOM Challenge, where it's all about weight. And I guess you rarely change between the chain rings. Well, I hardly did, that's for sure, apart from at the start. Do you think it is suitable for the Taiwan KOM Challenge?
Personally, not for me. So the only time I've used a one by is in the London Olympic time trial, because it was pretty flat and I was never going to use the small ring, and it was slightly more aero. But I found that actually the Taiwan race is actually not all just a steady uphill gradient. It's actually very changeable, especially at the start, and then the end is very steep. And you actually really need a big range of gears. So for myself, no, but I know it's not something I've really looked into for myself for racing, especially because I like proper mountain, so you need a big gear for going downhill and you need a small gear for going uphill, and then like 2-chain rings is the obvious. So I think not for Taiwan, but I'm open to discussion about it. I'd love to learn about it.
And just off the back of that question, obviously we've got the Irish Pro Continental team, Aqua Blue. This season they're going to be using one buyers exclusively throughout the year. I know we've done some videos on the kind of how they have to work the ratios. What do you think of that? What are your thoughts?
Interesting. I should probably look into it before I comment. So but before I make any silly comments, I'll watch the video.
But no, it certainly is. It's fascinating the way things are moving, gravel bikes, etc.
Yeah.
But it does get you thinking a lot. It's a very, very interesting subject.
Yeah.
Well, this question now from Fatin Liana Hassan over on Facebook. As a petite rider, I find it very challenging to ride alone on the flat, especially where there are headwinds and crosswinds involved. How do I train to mitigate this? A really good question there. We touched on it a little bit before.
Yeah, so that's something that I totally sympathise with as a small person, and the fact is that as a small person with small body mass and small muscle mass, you're always going to be at slight disadvantage on the flat, especially when it's windy, because you're smaller for the sort of the drag than a big person, obviously, but not as much smaller as your power is less. So we small people have an advantage going uphill, but a disadvantage on the flat and in crosswinds. So training wise, I mean, power is power. Your legs don't know whether you're going uphill or on the flat, so any training you do that gets you fitter is going to be good. But the most important thing, obviously, when it's windy is position on your bike to be aerodynamic. So the smaller you can get, and that's also, it really helps to have a bike that fits you, which is something that as a small person I've struggled with over the years as well. And so really paying attention to whether you can get low enough at the front. And so I guess the training you could do is sort of help your hip flexibility to get really low. And
so look at your position. Aerodynamics is absolutely
exactly
key, but there's only so much you can do to mitigate it if you're particularly light.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, there are some very small riders who are excellent time trialists, also on the flat and in the wind. So it's not, don't give up on it. It's just that you've got to be clever about it, and you've got to, if you're riding up in the wind on the flat, then you're a big disadvantage. So get as small as you can, and that involves bike as well. And so the bike is important because it has to fit you.
Just on that note, we're going to go into a question from Gordon Richardson over on Facebook, who asks, 650B wheels versus 700C wheels. Do you use the smaller wheels purely for sizing, or do you find them more efficient in some way?
So I used 650C when I was racing for time trials, and last year as well for triathlon, and because I can't get the right position otherwise. So at my height, if I have 700C wheels, I just cannot get low enough at the front to be aerodynamic. So the only time I was successful on a time trial bike with 700C wheels was Beijing Olympics, where British Cycling made me, they made a fork with a base bar for the handlebar that came out of the fork, so it was super low. You're not allowed to do that anymore under the rules, so I just cannot get low enough.
It has to be a bike that's commercially available, basically, doesn't it, for this part of the...
In theory, they could sell that, but that wasn't the problem. It's just that you're not allowed to have the base bar coming out of the fork anymore. That's just one of the rules that they changed. So, just for geometry, it also actually handles way better for someone my size. So, if you can imagine someone 6 foot tall on an 800C bike, that's what it's like for me riding a 700C bike. So it's feels a bit toe crossover and all that stuff. So.
Okay, Luke Ryder asks, do you think the relatively high earnings available to women in triathlon means that the strongest female cyclists aren't necessarily in cycling?
I think that's totally impossible to tell because there aren't many people that cross over. So I think that the strongest cyclists are in cycling probably, and there are some, triathletes are very strong cyclists, but it's a totally different sport. You don't ride in the same attacking way in an Ironman or even an Olympic distance triathlon. The bike section is very different, so I think that's really hard to tell.
Okay. Ben Barber asked, the penultimate question now, what are the biggest things to focus on to improve your time in time trialling? So just all-round time trialling tips.
I think you can make the biggest difference in your fitness.
Of course.
So training-wise, train for the event you're doing. So if it's hilly, then train that, and otherwise you work out how long you're going to be time trialing for roughly in an ideal situation, and practice it suffering for as well as possible for that duration.
One of the I think things are changing now, have changed now in terms of riding time trials. Some riders ride to power, some riders don't ride to power. But I was a reasonable time trialist when I put my mind to it. But in a 40k time trial, I quite often used to be thinking about what I was having for tea.
Yeah.
So it's not just the physiological side, but we know that time trial it's a dark art, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's as much important to get your mental kind of approach right. So how do you're a consummate time trialist, former world champion, mentally, what's the most important thing? What's the crucial thing for you?
You have to really care about it. You have to really suffer. So, I mean, and I've had times where I haven't done very well, and it wasn't that I didn't get the time I wanted, it was that I was disappointed with the lack of effort and if I was mentally fatigued, which sounds silly, but if I was overtrained or fed up or I didn't want to be there, then I didn't put the effort in, and it wasn't even deliberate. It wasn't like I was being lazy, but you've got to arrive at a race ready to just empty your tank and suffer. And I think for me, one of the best time trials I ever did was my first attempt at the Worlds, where it wasn't a glorious result, but I had a bike that didn't really fit me. I was very inexperienced at that level, and I totally emptied the tank. Like I was coughing for days afterwards, and
Right.
I'm still quite proud of the effort I put in, even if it wasn't the best result of my career. And I think that's the thing, you've just got to suffer. Like time trialing's about hurting for that long, so go there fresh and you've got to really want it. Yeah,
if you haven't suffered, you haven't done enough, really. Basically, that's the short tour of it. Okay, our last question today, Emma, is from Matthew Lewis over on Facebook. What is Emma's favourite guilty treat?
Oh, well, I try not to feel guilty about stuff because I think it's a wasted emotion. But I do like my food, but I try and balance that out with exercise. So. Okay. But if you're talking about unhealthy foods that I like, I'm a big fan of cheese and chocolate and red wine. There's quite a few things that I would
just like a normal person, really,
like,
aren't you? Let's be honest with you.
I do love cheese, but I try and sort of moderate it. Yeah. But feeling guilty about it is not, it's not worth the hassle. No. So enjoy your food and enjoy your training, and I think it's really certainly something that has kept me going through my career, and I've been racing quite a long time, is that I do like food, and I think I have a fairly balanced diet, and so I've stayed pretty healthy.
It's funny, isn't it? About a guilty pleasure. There's no real guilt in it because you get the best pleasure from food when you've really trained hard on your bike.
Oh, yeah.
So eating loads at Christmas is kind of, for me, it's a bit of a letdown. Food tastes the best when you've been out on your bike and you've trained hard. So it's kind of weird.
One of my best meals ever was a cheese sandwich when I'd done a massive hills ride, and I was just, that kind of food anything tastes good when you're hungry. So I agree. Work up an appetite and then enjoy it.
Definitely. Top tip of the day. Well, Emma, it has been fascinating and enlightening. Thanks very much for coming in and answering all those questions. Hope it didn't weigh out too much. But if kind of weirdly you haven't already, subscribe to the Global Cycling Network. You can do so for free, and that way you will not miss another video. You can do so by clicking on the globe. Now, we talked quite a lot about two other videos that I think you'd enjoy. If you click just down here, Emma takes you on a tour of her Bond Pro bike. And if you click just down here, you get a closer look at the KOM Challenge in Taiwan. And don't forget to like and share.